This is Logan Sekulow with breaking news. Mississippi's Attorney General asked the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live.
Mississippi is asking the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. This as the state appeals a ruling against one of its abortion laws.
Phone lines are open for your questions right now. Call 1-800-684-3110.
The High Court is expected to hear that case this fall.
And now your host, Logan Sekulow.
Welcome to Sekulow. This is Logan Sekulow, joined by Than Bennett, Washington, D.C., Will Haynes in studio. We got a jam-packed show coming up in the next segment. Attorney, senior counsel for the ACLJ, C.C. Heil, is going to be joining us to talk about this specific moment coming out of the Attorney General's office in Mississippi as they call for the end of Roe versus Wade and return to the state rights option of life and abortion. So we're going to talk about that. Also, later on in the show, Senator James Lankford from Oklahoma is going to be joining us, not only to talk about this, but to talk about the Ben and Jerry situation and what that means for Israel and the entire BDS movement. And then later on, Secretary Mike Pompeo will be joining us as well to talk about his new blog. So, Will, we got a jam-packed show, but I think we should at least briefly go over what we're talking about. As people probably saw in the title, and as we said earlier on, this is somewhat breaking news that came out last night. In the case of Dobbs versus Jackson, a women's health organization, Mississippi Attorney General filed her brief with the Supreme Court of the United States defending the right of the people to pass laws that protect the life and women's health and address and legitimate interest in the states, essentially saying abortion after a certain amount of time should be illegal. And not only beyond that, that means we need to take a new look and potentially, what she says, overturn the two landmark abortion cases.
That's right. So this is Attorney General Lynn Fitch of Mississippi. And what she's done in this is file the petitioner's brief. So this is the case. Mississippi passed a ban on abortions after 15 weeks. So that was struck down in the two lower courts, and Mississippi asked the Supreme Court to take it up. We actually filed an amicus in that request of the Supreme Court to take it up. They announced at the end of last term that they would be taking that up. So we've talked about this on the broadcast. This is the petitioner's brief. So the state of Mississippi, the Attorney General is representing Dobbs, who is the state health official in this case. This is, it's a pretty big deal. And let me read right from the brief right here. It says, Roe and Casey are egregiously wrong. The conclusion that abortion is a constitutional right has no basis in text, structure, history, or tradition. And then the Attorney General goes on to ask that they overrule these previous decisions of the court.
Look, I think a lot of people are always curious what the fight for life looks like in a world where Roe versus Wade has been the law for the last 50-ish years. What does it look like? What can we actually do to push back against sort of the juggernauts of abortion? Well, we have interesting movement. And look, you look at this specific instance, you go, well, the ACLJ, how are we involved? We're going to get in that in the next segment. We have C.C. Heil on to explain the situation because, as Will said, this is the state calling for it. And so it's not necessarily something we would specifically represent the state. However, we are involved. We are filing. We are a part of this, putting our efforts as much as we can, not only through media advocacy, but also traditional advocacy out there saying this is an important topic we need to be discussing. We're also going to talk about the legal implications of this type of law, what it actually means. If you overturn Roe, I think a lot of people's general thoughts, well, that means abortion is no longer legal. Not the case. That means it will return to the states. And we're going to talk about how that will all work and what that would look like. This is one of those cases we've been waiting for. I know, look, if those who have been on the front lines of the fight for life have waited for moments like this, so we definitely don't need to hold off. We need to step forward and go forward in faith and go forward for the children of our country. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Like I said, we have a jam-packed show, but we will be taking your phone calls as well. 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. Coming in next segment, we have senior counsel for the ACLJ, C.C. Heil, to discuss this. Again, following that, we will have on Senator James Lankford from Oklahoma, and later on, Mike Pompeo. Packed show. Again, to support the work of the ACLJ, we're headed towards the end of our matching challenge for this month. We'd appreciate it. Any donation you gift is effectively doubled. That's at aclj.org. We'll be right back.
The state of Mississippi just asked the Supreme Court to overturn Roe versus Wade.
The Supreme Court has agreed to review a Mississippi law restricting abortions. The case could set the stage for a weakening of Roe versus Wade.
The court agreed to weigh in on a Mississippi law that would ban the procedure after the 15-week mark, before viability, when a fetus can survive outside the womb.
Mississippi's Gestational Age Act was passed back in 2018, but two federal courts have blocked the wall.
Lower courts struck the law down, saying it ran counter to a string of the Supreme Court's abortion rights rulings.
And that being, of course, the 1973 decision in Roe versus Wade, and then that 1992 decision in Planned Parenthood versus Casey. If the court rules this Mississippi law can be upheld, that would upend Roe, it would upend Casey, it would upend our abortion law cases as we know them.
There's no way that the Supreme Court can uphold the restriction on abortion that Mississippi has in place without reversing Roe versus Wade.
If the Supreme Court's prior holdings say you can't ban abortion before viability, and here comes a state that wants to ban abortion before viability, how can those two things exist?
The White House responded to the news.
The president is committed to codifying Roe, regardless of the outcome of this case.
The Supreme Court needs to decide whether a state has the ability to regulate abortions after the viability line. That's something that previous court decisions have been confusing about, with the court suggesting that maybe you can't do that, but yet upholding other pre-viability laws, such as those that prohibit partial birth abortions. And so this will be a case that significantly clarifies abortion jurisprudence in this country.
The court will hear this case in the fall during its next term, with a decision probably about a year from now. The Mississippi law, meantime, remains blocked and cannot be enforced.
Welcome back to Sekulow. We are joined by Senior Counsel for the ACLJ, Cece Heil. Cece, we've been discussing earlier in the show the implications of the statement in the case that's coming out of Mississippi. I think I'd love to hear from you specifically what the ACLJ is doing in these kind of situations. I know when the state is the one who's making it, how are we a part of this, and how can our people get behind and support the work? I know we got petitions going on. What does it all mean, though?
So the case that's coming up before the Supreme Court, there will be a time for amicus briefs to be filed in support of Mississippi's laws. And that's what the ACLJ will be doing legally. And that's how people can help. They can go online at aclj.org and sign our petitions, and that's very helpful. But that's the process that we're in. These briefs will be filed next week.
Yeah, it's a big deal. I think we need any movement on life has to be at least explained, told to our audience, so they know that there is a fight that's continual. I think it's easy to lose faith in such an argument when Roe versus Wade has been on the books for so long, but we're out there making the moves, actually making change, because you may look at it and go, well, this, whether it's done by viability or what the weeks are, or is it late term does any of that really matter when there is Roe versus Wade? Well, that's why there are cases like this to hopefully relook at what all went down and what current technology and what current science says.
Right. And what's important for our listeners to know and remember is that there is no right to abortion in the Constitution. It was a judicially fabricated right that was created in the opinion of Roe v. Wade. And that Roe v. Wade opinion has been continuously attacked by legal scholars, interestingly, on the right and the left, as a terrible opinion. And Casey tried to come after Roe v. Wade and say, well, yes, the states do have some legitimate interests in this abortion issue, but it didn't go far enough. And the problem is, just like you said, they picked this arbitrary point of viability to say when a state's interest become compelling. And that is what this case is saying, is that that's an arbitrary point that was picked, and the states, this issue should be returned back to the states where it belongs. And it's interesting that Justice O'Connor stated, that the potential life is no less potential in the first weeks than it is at viability, which just points out the ridiculousness of the court picking such an arbitrary point, which keeps changing with medical technology and as we know more.
So let's discuss that a little bit deeper. When it comes to Roe gets overturned in theory. That happens. For those who don't really understand what that means, it doesn't mean a all-out, now all of a sudden abortion is illegal across the board, because Roe just took it and made it federal. So it takes it back to the states. So you'd likely, and Cece, you can probably go into more detail about this, you would likely have states that have very strict life laws, and then you'd have states like in New York or California that may come out with extreme issues where, we know what goes on in New York, and even with partial birth and how much it's celebrated kind of in a disgusting way, lighting up the Empire State Building for it. So there would be sort of a split America probably in terms of where the laws would end up going.
That's correct. If it's returned back to the states, then it's the states that make those determinations. Then it becomes really in the hands of the people for them to vote for the legislators that they want representing their values. So it literally returns this issue back into the hands of the people where it belongs.
Cece, the implications, analysts and the legal scholars and team here, everyone knew that the implications of this case would always potentially be the issue of Roe versus Wade. But now that the Attorney General of Mississippi has gone so far as to actually put that in the brief to highlight that, these two things are in conflict here. We have the Supreme Court precedent, we have our law, they're in conflict, and so therefore the Supreme Court should overturn Roe versus Wade and Casey. How big of a deal is that they actually go ahead and state that in the brief? Obviously, the Supreme Court could have addressed it, but that is the stated position of the state of Mississippi.
Well, I think it highlights the point that, first of all, this is a judicially fabricated right. And second of all, it is a completely arbitrary point that the court has picked when a state's interest becomes compelling in protecting the life of the mother and the unborn baby. And the Supreme Court has admitted that there is a compelling interest that the states have in protecting the life of an unborn baby. So when you go after the fact that when is it that we can start prohibiting abortion and protecting the life of the unborn baby, it does completely undermine Roe, which is saying, one, we've created a right to abortion, and two, we're telling you that right basically is absolutely an absolute right up into the point of viability, which again is arbitrary. And so this case is going to the unconstitutionality of abortion right, and then the arbitrariness of the point where they say a state's interest becomes compelling. So it really does undo Roe v. Wade.
Hey, and I want to talk to you for a moment about this, because one of the things we do at the ACLJ, and people hear about it a lot, are our petitions. And there is a petition right now, Overturn Roe versus Wade, Defeat Abortion, Save Babies, the petition to overturn Roe v. Wade. It's got about 240,000 people who have signed it. What does that mean when it comes to what you can do in Washington to help these kind of laws get passed, not only in Washington, but with the states, and obviously as things progress, because we have a state now saying, hey, Supreme Court, you need to take a better look at this. Than, what does that look like for you in terms of the work that we do?
I think these petitions are particularly impactful on an issue like this, Logan, where there's a federal component and there's a state component. On the federal level, we are able to take those names, break them down by state, and go to members of the House and the Senate and tell them what their voters want them to do. In this case, it's essentially to stand down, Logan. I mean, they want the court to return this power to the states, to return it to the legislative branches where the people, Logan, have the most power. So if that power were to return to the states, the voters in those states, the citizens of those states, would have the ability to weigh in with their state legislatures and have an impact. And Logan, I think it's particularly compelling here because at that state legislature level, and you referenced this, that's where you actually can find quite a bit of consensus on this issue. Now, look, the consensus that some of the states are going to find is one that I'm not going to be particularly in agreement with, but it's so divisive on a federal level, Logan. When you get down to the state level, you can find a whole lot more consensus. And by the way, Cece's talked a lot about viability and how arbitrary that is. Roe talks about 24 weeks of viability, Logan. It is regular course for babies to be born before that and lead a healthy, thriving life. I know this firsthand. So it's just another example of how that ruling in Roe is very outdated.
Yeah, it's hard for those kind of situations because you look at it, you said 24 weeks is what it says. Technology is moving, and that's moving it further and further back. And we know this, and we know life is getting longer. On one end, on the other end, there's technology involved to start earlier and to protect a baby at its earliest stages. Again, I'm a preemie dad. I know a lot of people who listen are as well. So I understand these situations. I've been there. Maybe not to that extreme where it's 22 weeks, but there are people who are doing it, as you said, and it's happening. So we do need to occasionally take a look at how technology and science, and I think that's something that people always hate to bring up, that the technology and the science is clearly on the side of people who are more pro-life. But that doesn't matter. It seems like that's always, there's another scapegoat there. Cece, it always seems like that we only got a couple minutes, but technology all of a sudden in science can't be taken into consideration in terms of life.
Yeah. So technology and science is only helpful when it helps the left side. Once it starts supporting the side of life, then all of a sudden it doesn't matter. And they change their talking points. Right. They don't talk anymore about it killing a baby. They talk about access to reproductive health. So they just changed the talking points, but it's about killing a baby. And just like Justice O'Connor said, potential life is no less potential in the first weeks than it is at viability. So it's arbitrary. Life is life. It begins at conception, and we need to do everything we can to protect it.
Well, thank you, Cece, for joining us, and thank you for your continual fight for life in terms of the ACLJ and all your work that you do here. And I want to encourage everyone, if you haven't taken a look at it, go to aclj.org. Cece puts out great pieces, as well as all the team puts out amazing blogs and stories and videos, and you can find her on our new More Than Ever series. And hey, towards the end of the show, we're going to play you a portion of our life episode of More Than Ever, which is available right now on morethanever.com. But we're going to play that later in the show. In the next segment, we're going to be joined by Senator James Lankford from Oklahoma. You know him. You've heard him here before. We're going to talk about this, and we're going to talk about life. He's a very strong proponent of life. But we're also going to talk about what's going on in terms of what sometimes sounds silly, which is Ben & Jerry's ice cream and how they have pulled out of what they consider to be occupied territories. Of course, that means Jerusalem and areas of Israel, and saying they're no longer going to serve there. Well, Oklahoma has a response as well, because they have some laws on the books, so we'll see how that going to play out. We're going to talk to him in the next segment. And then later on, we'll be joined by Secretary Mike Pompeo, also senior counsel for the ACLJ. So that's going to be an interesting segment. Talk about his new piece at aclj.org. Support the work continually, especially in this month of July, where all of your donations are effectively doubled. That is at aclj.org. And hey, we are going to take some phone calls as well. There's a few lines open. 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. We'll be right back with more on Sekulow.
Our God-given freedoms are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Protecting life is not and should not be a partisan issue.
That culture and value of life is under attack.
Abortion is not health care. It is murder.
The Hyde Amendment has been a part of federal law since 1976, when it was first passed as part of the annual appropriations process. Very simply put, the Hyde Amendment is a prohibition on U.S. taxpayer dollars used to fund abortions directly in the United States.
This Congress must take back its congressional responsibility and craft spending bills which protect the lives of the unborn.
Every life is blessed with inherent worth, infinite potential, and sacred dignity.
Imagine a world where every child was given the opportunity to dream, accomplish, and succeed. The world would be a much better place, our future brighter than ever.
The majority of Americans agree that taxpayer dollars should never be used to fund abortions.
To represent the values of all Americans, Congress must respect their rights of conscience and not disregard them.
The Biden administration has now proposed repealing the Hyde Amendment for good. That is why members of Congress are going down to the floor of the House in defense of the Hyde Amendment and actually calling for it to be made a part of permanent U.S. federal law.
No one should be forced to financially support the abortion industry.
We must put faith and family back in the center of our lives and promote policies that support our innocent unborn.
Every president since Carter has signed the Hyde Amendment into law.
Madam Speaker, the question before us today is a simple and straightforward moral issue.
There's no more vulnerable person than a child in the womb.
Do they not deserve our care and our protection?
It is a critical, life-saving protection that goes beyond party line politics. It is about human life and protecting the most innocent among us.
Welcome back to Sekulow. We're going to be joined shortly by Senator James Lankford from Oklahoma. Let's quickly take a phone call while we wait for him to get connected. Let's go to Cindy, who's calling in California on line 1. Cindy, you're on the air.
Hello.
Hi, go ahead.
How are you? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Okay, great. I wanted to know why in this particular case you keep mentioning that the court's going to decide to probably perhaps send the right to abortion back to the states to decide.
Sure.
Why couldn't the court decide that abortion is illegal from the moment of conception, since they originally decided that?
Sure, Cindy. What the situation at hand was that the case itself of Roe versus Wade is what made it federally a law. So when removing Roe versus Wade, it returns back to the states. I'm not a lawyer, but hopefully that gives you a clear
And we'll be getting into more analysis in that next week when we have Jordan and Jay back on the air to discuss that at length and what our brief does as well.
All right, on the phone right now, we have Senator James Lankford from Oklahoma. Senator, earlier this week, we've talked about this, and again, it's easy to kind of trivialize this and make this feel silly, but news broke that Ben & Jerry's ice cream was pulling out of its products out of Israel. You tweeted this: Ben & Jerry's has now decided they know more about Jerusalem than the Israelis. If Ben & Jerry's wants to have a meltdown and boycott Israel, Oklahoma is ready to respond because Oklahoma has an anti-boycott of Israel law in place. So let's discuss that. I want to ask you not only about that law and what that means, but also why you think a company like Ben & Jerry's would go after an ally like this, a corporate business. Why do you feel like this is something that a big corporation decides is the sword to die on?
I don't know why they would decide that if they attack Israel, that's their way to advance their own company. But if they want to be able to attack Israel's sovereignty, and if they want to try to belittle it or try to be able to boycott Israel based on policies, that's their own company's business. But they should not just believe that we're just going to ignore that. If they want to be able to do that as a progressive company out of Vermont, fine, they can do that. But our state has already determined that people that attack Israel with the boycott, divestment, and sanction regime that they're doing as companies, and has become popular among some in the left, we've already determined as a state we're just not going to do state contracts with those companies and to say we don't have to do business with you either. And the simple, straightforward way is if they want to be able to belittle Israel, we have every opportunity to be able to just respond and say we're not going to do business with you.
It's a pretty bold statement coming out of Oklahoma.
And, Senator, a lot of times the people are hesitant with boycotts as far as retaliatory, but this is an interesting way to tackle this because Ben & Jerry's has kind of opened the door to this by boycotting Israel, and then it's the actual government of Oklahoma that would not be doing business. Is that the way I understand the state law?
That's correct. The state law doesn't prohibit
I think we're
liberal ice cream. They're welcome to go buy liberal ice cream. They want to be able to do that in any grocery store, convenience store, whatever it may be. But it actually blocks the state from contracting with them. So our state parks, state facilities, any of those areas that we would just say, hey, we're just not going to sell that product here. By the way, we've got a lot of great ice creams in Oklahoma. We can just sell all those great ice creams in Oklahoma. We don't need to get Vermont ice cream anyway. But the whole focus for us is people can choose to buy what they want to choose. But our state has made a statement about boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And those companies that do that against Israel, we just don't do business with them as a state.
Dan.
Appreciate you joining us. I appreciate your longtime partnership with us on many issues. I wanted to shift gears for just a moment here. You have long been one of the most fervent voices on the side of life on Capitol Hill, and we're so grateful for that. But as you know, the Supreme Court is about to hear what might be the most significant case on this issue since Roe v. Wade. We've been talking about it on this broadcast, the Dobbs case. And an issue there is whether or not states can restrict abortion before so-called viability, which, as you know, is an ever-shifting line, and that is kind of the point. But talk for a minute, if you would, about your sense at what's at stake here, and in your opinion, what you think the court should do in that case.
Yeah, there's no question that the court should look at this case and the Dobbs case, look at the clear facts of it, and overturn Roe v. Wade and overturn the Casey decision, and to say states have the right to be able to make a decision to be able to protect their own citizens. What was done in 1973 with Roe v. Wade was this arbitrary decision to say once a child is viable, then the states could actually engage. As we know from medical science right now, at a child at conception, when that cell division is happening, that's DNA that's different than the mom, different than the dad. That is a unique human being that's actually there. That is a separate person. And the court should just acknowledge what's already happening in science and what people can see. And quite frankly, you can look at a sonogram and what's self-evident on a sonogram. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a beating heart, DNA that's different than the mom or the dad. That is a different person. And when a state steps in to be able to speak into that, to be able to say, hey, we have the responsibility to be able to protect individual citizens, we should do that. Quite frankly, the Supreme Court has allowed states to be able to have laws in their state to say if someone kills a pregnant mother, that they can be held to account for them murdering two people. So while the Supreme Court in one case allows the state to be able to protect the rights of an unborn child if there's an assault or a murder, they don't allow that same right of the state to be able to protect a child in an abortion. That is a double standard from the court. They should acknowledge that, and they should pull back and allow the states to be able to make these decisions.
It's a double standard, Senator Lankford, and also technology is just moving so rapidly that you would think that the far left and these people who preach science and preach technology, that this would be right in their wheelhouse. But of course it has to do with life, and it has to become a politically divided issue because it does. The science no longer supports their way of thinking. But do you think that we're winning in this? Do you think cases like Dobbs that are happening, we're seeing movement actually happen in the fight for life? And that's something that sometimes feels like isn't happening, but right now we have a moment.
Oh, no, it's absolutely happening. More and more people are trying to acknowledge the self-evident fact. When I show people a picture of a child in the womb, a sonogram picture, and I just ask them the question, what is that? No one answers that's tissue. No one answers that way. Yeah, everyone looks at that and says, that's a baby. That's very, very clear on that. And so anyone who wants to look at the science or the self-evident facts in the case, do that. The only argument for abortion is an argument really of convenience, to say this child's not convenient, and so I'm going to kill this child, and then I'll try to make another child later on that. I think that's abhorrent for us as a culture to be able to say we're going to stand on the side of if children are inconvenient, you can kill them. If children are not convenient, you can keep them and call them a child. That child is a child no matter what you name it, whatever verbiage that you use, that's still a child. And so we should, as a culture, be consistent both with the science and with the self-evident facts that a child is a child is a child is a child. And then the decision is, what do we need to do to best protect the life of each individual person?
Well, Senator Lankford, I just want to first just thank you for your continued support of life and of Israel and being one of the loud, outspoken people on our side. And I really do appreciate that. I think that is becoming harder and harder to find in some ways, but you're out there supporting the issues that are core to the ACLJ and core to what's happening in Washington, what our listeners know is the most important thing, the fight for life and even the fight for Israel and for our country. So I want to thank you and the state of Oklahoma for standing up against Ben and Jerry's. I appreciate you taking the time talking to us and talking to our audience, getting us informed. It's good to know what's happening all around the country. So thank you. And I want to encourage everyone who is listening right now. In the next segment of the show, we're going to be taking some phone calls. I'd love to hear from you. You just heard from Senator James Lankford. You just heard from Senior Counsel Cece Howell. Later on, you're going to hear from Secretary Mike Pompeo. And guess what? Who else we could hear from? You. That's at 1-800-684-3110. For those who lose us after the first half hour, join us live or later on all social media platforms. We're live on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. You can find us there. Search for Jay Sekulow. Make sure you like, follow, subscribe all of our channels. Jay Sekulow, Logan Sekulow, ACLJ, Jordan Sekulow. We're there and at aclj.org. And again, we'll be back with another half hour of Sekulow right after this.
Here's what I want to say to our ACLJ members, or for those of you that enjoy watching this broadcast. Whether it is going after the deep state, whether it is litigation that we're engaged in, whether it is defending the persecuted church and getting individuals out of prison because of their faith in other countries, whether it's training lawyers to fight for religious liberty, not just here in the United States, but around the globe, whether it is producing a daily, 5 days a week, 1-hour live television and radio broadcast heard on thousands of radio stations, on TV platforms, on social media platforms. Your support of the ACLJ enables us to do all of this. We want to encourage you to support the work of the ACLJ, and when you do that, you're supporting our production teams, our videos, whether it's that kind of production and other things that we are working on. The ACLJ is front and center on this. We're in a matching challenge campaign. Any amount you donate, we get a matching gift for. Go to aclj.org.
Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live. And now your host, Logan Sekulow.
This is Logan Sekulow joining you. Will Haynes also in Than Bennett in Washington, D.C. as well. Joining us in the next segment will be Secretary Mike Pompeo, Senior Counsel for Global Affairs at the ACLJ. We're talking about the breaking news that was coming out of the Attorney General's office of Mississippi, who said, hey, it's time to overturn Roe based on a case going up, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. And this is an interesting time. And Will, Jen Psaki, the White House press secretary, she had a statement to be made about this case and what would happen if Roe is overturned. Again, the fact they're having to answer these questions tells you that there is for the first time in a long time, the likelihood that this could happen. Roe versus Wade could be overturned in our lifetime. Yes, not only in our lifetime, in the next session of the Supreme Court. Let's hear from Jen Psaki, though.
The president is committed to codifying Roe, regardless of the outcome of this case.
So regardless of the outcome, whether the case is overturned and they decide, hey, the law is no longer what it was, the White House is saying, hey, we're going to codify this and we're going to come together. We're going to make it federal law. Sorry, states. Sorry, Supreme Court of the United States. It doesn't matter how you rule. The Biden administration is who will win overall. And that is a sad thing, and obviously something at the ACLJ, the reason part in Washington, D.C., we got to fight back against.
You know, even in that answer from Jen Psaki, Logan, it sort of gives away the game. She says that the president is committed to codifying Roe. It's an admission that this is not a part of statutory law, that this is something that was made up out of whole cloth by the Supreme Court. And so, of course, they can revisit and see whether or not it was a misinterpretation of Roe, which I clearly think it was. The other point I would make just quickly, Logan, this is an opportunity for the United States and particularly states across the country to catch up with the rest of the world. The rest of the world, Logan, has recognized that there is humanity in the womb and that a line must be drawn at some point during gestation. Logan, we've talked about it on this broadcast before, but I think we have to repeat it every chance we get. There are literally only 5 nations across the globe that don't draw a line and prohibit abortion somewhere. The United States is one of them. It's United States, Canada, China, North Korea, and Vietnam. Logan, it's a list we've got to get off of.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I have friends all over the world, and we've talked about, we have ACLJ offices, ECLJ in different places, and a lot of times we bring up the life, concept and like, hey, that's not even really a discussion point here because the line has been drawn. And though it would not be necessarily where we would want it to be, it doesn't come up in normal everyday occurrence and everyday conversation as it does in America, because as Than said, it's something that there is a red line for a lot of people and there's not as much pushback. There's not, because it's not as big of a crisis where we're saying unrestricted everything, it doesn't matter. It's different in other parts of the world, so don't let people think otherwise. Let's quickly jump to a phone call. Let's go to Steve in Pennsylvania. Steve, you're on the air.
Gentlemen, good afternoon.
Hey.
Thank you for what you're doing for the Children for Life. It's greatly appreciated. There's not enough coverage on that, and there should be, because that's vital. Real quickly, I'm a father of a preemie.
All right, right there with you.
In 1984, before the medicine was like it is today, I had a daughter, was born 3 months early, weighed only 1 pound and 13 ounces.
Wow.
And that's very scary the first time you walk into a NICU and you see your child basically in a dome, look like one of those ice cream cake lids of the old days.
I've been there. I understand.
You understand? But she persevered with great strength and managed well throughout life and school, graduated with honors in high school and college, and is now a mother of 2 healthy boys, 7 pounds and 9 pounds at birth, and she's only a 5'4" little thing.
Steve, what that proves is that you said you're a 38-year-old woman at this point, so you're talking about technology that has moved so rapidly. Look, I had preemie twins, tiny babies in the NICU, the whole thing. Like you said, it's a traumatic and a traumatic experience that will be with you forever. However, technology is moving because those children are just as viable and just as full of life. And I have 2 beautiful babies, obviously, and 3, but 2 that were preemies, and it's a miracle. So I appreciate it. Hey, coming up in the next segment, Secretary Mike Pompeo discusses his new blog on ACLJ.org. Support the work of the ACLJ at ACLJ.org/donate. We'll be right back.
The state of Mississippi just asked the Supreme Court to overturn Roe versus Wade.
The Supreme Court has agreed to review a Mississippi law restricting abortions. The case could set the stage for a weakening of Roe versus Wade.
The court agreed to weigh in on a Mississippi law that would ban the procedure after the 15-week mark, before viability, when a fetus can survive outside the womb.
Mississippi's Gestational Age Act was passed back in 2018, but 2 federal courts have blocked the wall.
Lower courts struck the law down, saying it ran counter to a string of the Supreme Court's abortion rights rulings.
And that being, of course, the 1973 decision in Roe versus Wade, and then that 1992 decision in Planned Parenthood versus Casey. If the court rules this Mississippi law can be upheld, that would upend Roe, it would upend Casey, it would upend our abortion law cases as we know them.
There's no way that the Supreme Court can uphold the restriction on abortion that Mississippi has in place without reversing Roe versus Wade.
If the Supreme Court's prior holdings say you can't ban abortion before viability, and here comes a state that wants to ban abortion before viability, how can those 2 things exist?
The White House responded to the news.
The president is committed to codifying Roe, regardless of the outcome of this case.
The Supreme Court needs to decide whether a state has the ability to regulate abortions after the viability line. That's something that previous court decisions have been confusing about, with the court suggesting that maybe you can't do that, but yet upholding other pre-viability laws, such as those that prohibit partial birth abortions. And so this will be a case that significantly clarifies abortion jurisprudence in this country.
The court will hear this case in the fall during its next term, with a decision probably about a year from now. The Mississippi law, meantime, remains blocked and cannot be enforced.
Welcome back to Sekulow. We are joined live by Secretary Mike Pompeo, Senior Counsel for Global Affairs at the ACLJ. Secretary, there is a new blog on the website, ACLJ.org. The Biden administration's invitation to UN investigators is disgraceful, is the title. What are these investigators that the Biden administration has invited?
So the Biden administration invited what they call the UN Special Rapporteur. This is someone who goes into countries. Their purpose is to validate whether human rights are being violated all around the world. But the truth is, it is a politically motivated left-wing institution that they've now invited inside to look at whether the United States of America is systemically racist. First, we know the answer to that. We don't need any outside party. We don't need the United Nations telling us. And second, there's a group that won't go into China and do the hard work that's needed there. It doesn't go report in an important way in Iran. It doesn't do the work where there are true human rights violations around the world. And then last, we know how this report is going to end. We know precisely who these people are that they're going to send. They're going to say that America is racist, that we're a racist nation, that we treat people disequitably. It's fundamentally untrue. I don't know why we would put America through this. I don't know why we would invite these people who don't respect our country in to evaluate who we are. It is indeed disgraceful, and we know what they'll do. They'll come up with the recommendations that make no sense for our country.
Mr. Secretary, does inviting these investigators, quote investigators, to come into the nation and to do this report, does it raise any concerns for you about yielding, even optically, some sovereignty to an international body?
It always does. It's frankly, it's one of the 2 reasons we left the Human Rights Council, UN Human Rights Council, the very institution that's conducting this investigation. You'll recall that in our administration, we saw that the leaders of this, the ones who were directing their activities, the board of directors, if you will, was Venezuela, Iran, really bad actors all around the world. And to give them any power, any influence, any capacity to impact America so that we can have this report that I am sure some left-wing congressman or woman can run around America saying, look, the UN says we are systemically racist. Yes, it yields this idea that we are self-correcting here in America. Our sovereignty depends on our republic, our constitutional principles. And when we have violations, right, when
bad things happen in America, people go to court. There is a resolution process to preserve and protect your constitutional rights and your human rights. This fundamentally abrogates the way that we do it in America, and a little bit of our sovereignty slips away each time we fall down into this path where we constantly apologize for the United States of America.
Mr. Secretary, Than Bennett here, and you mentioned Iran and the human rights violations that are happening here. I mean, there's obviously a whole list of egregious human rights situations around the world, a couple others that come to mind. The genocide of the Uyghurs in China, the crackdown on the protesters in Cuba. It seems to me that those are the issues that the Human Rights Council should be focused on. Is this effort detracting from that, or is the Human Rights Council looking at those situations as well?
Oh, goodness, no. This is an effort to deflect. The very reason they want to sit on as members of the UN Human Rights Council is so they can deflect. They tell these nonsensical stories, right? The Chinese say that the virus came from the United States, or the Iranians somehow say that the United States is the force that's undermining peace in the Middle East, right? They stand reason and logic and things we can see with our own eyes on their head. No, this is an institution. The UN Human Rights Council has to go away. It accomplishes little or no good. We put money into it now that the Biden administration has rejoined it. I can't imagine why we'd spend one taxpayer dollar on what is essentially a politically driven effort to undermine the United States of America and our constitutional principles.
Mr. Secretary, you brought up the fact that when you were Secretary of State, you were a part of the effort when you left the Human Rights Council, and the Biden administration has now rejoined. Why was it the right move then to leave this international body? And has it by any chance gotten any better at the Human Rights Council since that move?
No, it hasn't gotten any better, and we concluded there was no chance it would. Look, we took our swing in the first months of the administration to try and put some reforms through, some things that would actually put teeth into its human rights effort. Human rights around the world are an important thing. We worked really hard on them in the Trump administration. But this institution was not only doing nothing, it was worse. It was going to places that had good human rights records and besmirching their reputation. It was ignoring those who were violating. You talked about the Uyghurs. You talked about what's going on in Iran, right? Political prisoners being held in Evin prison. We see what's happening to the Cuban people. This organization is not going to do a thing. So we concluded we didn't want any American taxpayer money going there. And we knew we couldn't fix it. And I will tell you, the Biden administration rejoined it immediately. They haven't fixed it either. It is no better today than the day that we left from it.
Yeah, we see statements that are coming out when it comes to human rights around the world. And we've had on a lot of discussions today even about some things that seem silly, like the Ben & Jerry's situation. Ben & Jerry's pulls themselves out of what they consider to be occupied territories of Israel. But those are just small movements. When there are real humanitarian crises happening, and you have a few countries in that region that support human rights overall, and they're the ones getting punished by American companies because they, for some reason, think they know better.
It's the dangest thing. The thing with Ben & Jerry's is kind of a joke. Ben & Jerry's has been morally lost for an awfully long time. But there are important principles that do underlay that. When the world sees that, and they see that an American company is now saying that the Israelis are simply occupiers in the West Bank, something we know is fundamentally untrue. We lose each time. We lose just a little bit of the capacity to understand the real risk to the world, the real risk from those folks who are killing people, imprisoning people, torturing people, causing forced abortions to take place like are happening in Western China. We know the danger of these little silly moments with Ben & Jerry's because it escalates and it provides a marker and something for people who want to undermine the good nations, the rights-respecting nations around the world. These are important things, and we have to get them right. And it begins with the U.S. recognition that we shouldn't invite some silly investigator from the UN to tell us about America.
And speaking to that point as well, we've seen and we've had concern here about the push, even by some members of Congress, for oversight of the United States from the ICC, the International Criminal Court. And we've seen it, like we said, even Ilhan Omar pushed that with the Secretary of State Blinken just a few weeks back. And my concern is that when you allow other international bodies to start coming in and to start critiquing the United States as if we don't have a fully functioning judicial system that can have these issues, and you also have the pullout of the troops in Afghanistan, where you know that the ICC is already trying to find ways to get a grip on the United States in that way. Does it concern you that potentially having one international body come in with investigators could open up the door for weakness on the administration's part to resist calls from the ICC's oversight?
Well, clearly they're gonna do less on that than we did. We had sanctioned the senior prosecutor, woman named Fatou Bensouda. I did the sanction myself, who's the leader of the investigation. They want to put American kids, American soldiers who fought in Afghanistan under investigation by the International Criminal Court. But the ACLJ knows this court very well. Jay has argued at the ICC. This is an institution that has become political, not prosecutorial, not investigative. And they want to come after the big guy. They want to come after the Americans. We underwrite them. We make it all go. We underwrite everything there is in this international space, and it turns on us. This administration wants to internationalize instead of reinforce the institutions here in America. These are dangerous pathways. The ICC is a dangerous institution. There's a reason we didn't become a part of it and allow jurisdiction over our own, because we know how to take care of miscreants, misbehavior inside our own organizations. This administration appears to be prepared to allow Americans to suffer for this, and it is truly tragic.
Secretary Pompeo, as we wrap up, you brought up that the ACLJ has been there and has done that, and it's something that we are involved in all these issues, whether it's Israel, whether it's life, whether what's going on in foreign and domestic. And you've seen it firsthand with the work that we obviously do together at the ACLJ, but even during your time as secretary, you've seen how the ACLJ works. And it's important to have organizations like ours to be out there. I know that sounds like we're self-promoting, but it really does make a difference to have hundreds of thousands of members and supporters and people to back organizations like the ACLJ to really have a voice.
Jordan, it's not self-promotion. It's true. As America's Secretary of State, having big groups of people who cared about freedom, who cared about liberty, who cared about the ability of people to practice their faith, who were prepared to go to the ramparts and contribute to help make and preserve those rights for not only for Americans, but for people all across the world, to ensure that these civil liberties are enshrined in our law. These things matter. For elected officials like me, they were an important bulwark. They helped guide, and they helped form a basis so that others in the world could see that America was serious about this work.
Well, Secretary Pompeo, Senior Counsel for Global Affairs to the ACLJ, I appreciate you every time you come on here and discuss and really explain to our audience what's happening domestically and foreign and what's happening around the world. And we appreciate all the work that you bring to the ACLJ and to support people like Secretary Pompeo, the work that we do here, this broadcast, but not only this broadcast, the legal work that we do around the world. You can get involved. Go to aclj.org, make your donation today, tax-deductible donation, and any gift you give during the month of July is effectively doubled, because we have another amazing member and group of members on the other side saying, hey, if someone gives $10, I'll be right there and I'll give $10. Someone gives $1,000, I'll be right there and I'll match that and give another $1,000. So we could use your support right now. What I encourage you to do is go to aclj.org. Don't only donate, though. While you're there, sign up for the email list. Take a look at what's going on. Great video content, great blogs that go up from people like Secretary Pompeo each and every day on aclj.org. Follow us on all social media platforms. We have a great segment coming up from our More Than Ever series in the next segment.
Thanks to your support of the ACLJ, we have had many victories.
The IRS now formally apologizing to Tea Party groups.
The IRS did the right thing by resolving the case with an injunction that mandated a complete change of the IRS nonprofit tax-exempt work as it relates to issue advocacy organization.
If any group feels that they're being targeted, they can go to federal court and bring our case. That's a victory.
It's one of the most significant wins in the ACLJ's history, to take on the IRS and win.
For more than 27 years, the ACLJ has been fighting for freedom and liberty in the United States and around the globe.
These are young people in their 20s and 30s that are doing this. They're fighting for life at a whole new level to beat back the abortion juggernaut. We've got a whole group of young lawyers that are defending them.
Those of us that believe in life know that we're on the right side of history. We understand full well children are children, and they're precious in God's sight, and they're precious in our nation's sight, and they're precious to parents.
But I actually think we're winning. This is one of the social issues we're winning.
The release of Andrew Brunson. He is the American evangelical from North Carolina, held in Turkey for more than 2 years.
They're rushing us to the airport
And there was an Air Force plane that came from Germany that had been on standby. We're flying, and they finally left Turkish airspace. It's like, okay, now we're really out of Turkey and free again.
We're grateful to ACLJ who put it out to these people, they were getting all this out.
All of the people who prayed for us through ACLJ and through your contacts, I'm thankful, I'm grateful, and actually I'm astounded.
We need your help as we continue this work here in the United States and around the world. Join the matching challenge today, and your tax-deductible donation will be doubled.
Welcome back to Sekulow. I want to jump right into it. This is a new episode of our brand new series, More Than Ever. You can find the whole series as it rolls out over the next number of months on morethanever.com. Multiple episodes are up right now. This is the one that our team did on life. Take a look.
For the American Center for Law and Justice, for the ACLJ, life has always been a top issue since our founding.
Barbara, I am here at this site because your office asked me to come here. You all wanted the dramatic effect. You got it. There are thousands of people and millions across America that disagree, that say abortion's murder. And the fact of the matter is, what this case is all about are people speaking out.
The two core issues for us at the American Center for Law and Justice, 100%, of course, number one, religious liberty. And the second issue, which I think is core to the ACLJ's mission and so important to us since our founding, is the fight for life, the fight for the unborn.
The ACLJ has always been at the forefront of fighting for life, whether that is defunding Planned Parenthood or supporting clinics that come alongside the mother and support the mother through the entire pregnancy.
When you talk about the defense of innocent preborn life, I really think this sits at the very center of everything that ACLJ does.
It's a fundamental issue for the ACLJ. Either the unborn child is a human being or they're not.
If you can't agree on life and the right for everyone to have a chance to live, then everything else really doesn't matter.
This has been a very, very difficult issue, in part because the ACLJ has had to deal with progressives.
During the Trump administration, we had a lot of success on defunding Planned Parenthood. They reinstated the Mexico City policy so that U.S. taxpayer dollars were not going to foreign organizations that were funding abortion. But that's all been changed now.
The Biden administration has effectively ended the Mexico City policy.
And what the Mexico City policy did was to forbid American aid going to countries where they would use U.S. taxpayer dollars to perform abortions.
We all have to work really hard to ensure that no American taxpayer dollar ever goes to underwrite an abortion and to stop funding from going to abortions anywhere in the world.
This has been a key part of America's stance for life, for the value of human life, for morality itself.
The Biden administration has appointed Xavier Becerra, a radical pro-abortion individual.
So the HHS Secretary, former Attorney General of California, was also a congressman, Javier Becerra, is up to become the nominee. He is now the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And he gets asked about his vote on partial birth abortion.
I will tell you that when I come to these issues, I understand that we may not always agree on where to go, but I think we can find some common ground on these issues.
I think for all of us, when it comes to partially delivering a child and then killing it, there's no common ground.
The HHS Secretary is the most pro-abortion HHS Secretary, Health and Human Services, in our nation's history. He tried to shut down and silence crisis pregnancy centers. He tried to make crisis pregnancy centers advertise where the abortions will be performed in the state of California.
We've seen that the Biden administration is completely sold out to the pro-abortion movement. We've seen that with ties to Planned Parenthood. We've seen that with funds funneling into abortion. We've seen that with appointments that President Biden has made.
I support a woman's right to choose. I support it's a constitutional right. I've supported it. I will continue to support it. And I will, in fact, move as president to see to that the Congress legislates that.
It starts here at home with the United States government, holding them accountable, holding the Biden administration accountable so that all Americans are able to have faith in their government.
People think, well, if Republicans are in charge, then, it's the Republican Party platform is pro-life, so it would be easy to defund Planned Parenthood. But that's not really how Congress works. Not every Republican is as pro-life. When you have a pro-life president in office controlling the executive agencies, that's where you can really see some movement. And we saw that under President Trump.
Now, here's the good news. They are setting policy, and that gives us the opportunity to go to court to challenge those policies. And we have a conservative Supreme Court. Now, the great test on how conservative that court is about to happen.
We are for life. Life is a precious gift of God. It is a precious gift of the Holy Spirit. It is something that we believe in very deeply and have for decades upon decades. We do not believe in abortion on demand. We do not believe in killing children.
If you look back at the whole history of the abortion movement, it is tied in with Margaret Sanger.
I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born.
And she wanted to shrink the population of the United States and perhaps of other Western countries, grounded in the perception that certain people are either unfit to live or they are unworthy of life.
Life is under attack, and we have to protect the precious, innocent lives that the Biden administration deems unworthy.
There's two main issues, too, in the fight for life that we're working on right now at the ACLJ. One is we're seeing the refunding of Planned Parenthood. When Planned Parenthood gets more money, they get more powerful. And when they get more powerful, Planned Parenthood gets stronger and more aggressive in court.
We're having to file more briefs now than ever before. We're in court now more than ever before. We've got a major appeal at the U.S. Court of Appeals from the Ninth Circuit defending those who spoke out for life that have been sued literally by Planned Parenthood and NARAL for simply exposing the fact that these groups were involved, and this is the allegations in the videos, in the sale of human body parts. And they really didn't deny it. They just said it was legal. We take a different view. But they went after the videographers, the reporters, the investigative journalists.
The United States is one of only 7 countries in the world that does not restrict abortion at any stage of the pregnancy. That is a list that you do not want to be on.
I truly believe that when you're fighting for life, when you're fighting for the life of the unborn, you're on the right side.
There's no way to quantify how many people are alive today because of the work of the American Center for Law and Justice just on this issue alone.
I'll never forget my brother-in-law, who's a radiologist, said the technology will get so good, the imaging will be so great, that when you see the child at 8 weeks, 10 weeks, whatever it might be, there's going to be no debate that this is a human being, this is a person. And that is absolutely correct.
And that is one of our latest episodes in the More Than Ever series. I encourage you all to go to morethanever.com. It's a really easy, direct way to do it. You can watch, there's 4 episodes up right now. There's ones on education and school choice. There's one on life that you just watched. There's ones about Christian persecution around the world, and one currently on the deep state shadows in the Capitol that just went out. And there'll be a brand new one next week that I actually have to watch after we're done with this to approve and make sure it's good to go. And again, that's available on morethanever.com. You can stay up to date there also and make your donation through that. But we also encourage you, just go to aclj.org, click donate. Hey, download the ACLJ app. Thank you for listening this week. I want to appreciate it. I know you've had me all week, which I know is a bit of a change of plans. Don't worry. My dad and brother are back next week. But in the meantime, we're going to be posting brand new content to all our social media platforms. Make sure you follow me at Logan Sekulow on Instagram, on Twitter, as well as on all forms of social media. On YouTube, hit the subscribe button if you're watching right now, or go to my channel and subscribe. But you can do that on ACLJ. Again, new content posted regularly, daily, on all of these sites. Sign up to the website, sign up to the email list on the website, aclj.org. Make your donations today, because for the month of July, all donations are effectively doubled because of a matching challenge. I mean, someone on the other end, another incredible member of the ACLJ, is matching your donation at any donation at any level. That is at aclj.org. aclj.org right now to support the work of the American Center for Law and Justice. Thank you again for listening. We'll be back on Monday with a brand new show, but new content all weekend online.